3 days before my wedding, my father called to tell me I was no longer important enough to walk beside. My name is Darcy. I'm 33 years old. And this is the story of how the people who were supposed to love me most finally taught me the difference between relatives and family. The call came on a Thursday night. I remember because I was sitting on my apartment floor, surrounded by wedding invitations, flower samples, and half-packed boxes. My fiancé, Caleb, was in the kitchen making tea. Soft music played in the background. Everything felt calm, safe. Then my phone rang.
Dad.
I smiled automatically when I saw his name. That habit never really leaves you, even when someone disappoints you repeatedly. "Hey, Dad," I answered warmly. Silence. Not complete silence. Just the kind filled with hesitation. And, immediately, something inside me tightened. "I've been thinking," he said slowly. "Never a good start." "What about?" Another pause. "About the wedding." My stomach dropped. Because children who grow up emotionally neglected become experts at recognizing tone. And his tone said one thing clearly. Disappointment was coming. "I don't think I should walk you down the aisle." The world didn't stop dramatically. There was no movie-like gasp. Just quiet. Heavy quiet. "What?" I whispered. "I think it would upset Vanessa." Vanessa. My older sister. Of course. Even on my wedding week, it somehow became about her. I laughed softly. Not because it was funny. Because shock sometimes sounds like laughter. "Upset her how?" Dad sighed heavily. "You know how emotional she's been since the divorce."
Ah, yes.
Vanessa's divorce. The event that had apparently turned her into the emotional center of the universe for the last 11 months. "She feels like watching me walk you down the aisle will be hard for her right now," he continued. "She said it'll remind her of her own wedding." I sat completely still. 33 years old. And somehow, I was still losing pieces of my life. To protect my sister's feelings. It wasn't new. Growing up, Vanessa was always the priority. When she cried, the whole house adjusted. When I cried, I was too sensitive. When she failed a class, my parents hired tutors. When I succeeded, they said, "Well, that's expected from you." Vanessa got celebrations. I got responsibilities. By 14, I was cooking dinner twice a week. By 16, I was helping Mom manage Vanessa's emotional breakdowns after bad dates. I became useful, not cherished. And useful daughters learn something dangerous. Love becomes tied to sacrifice. So even now, part of me wanted to say, "It's okay, Dad. I understand." But another part of me, the exhausted part, finally asked, "What about me?" Silence again. Then the sentence that changed everything. "Darcy," he said tiredly, "please don't make this into drama." Drama. Funny how people use that word when they want your pain to stay quiet. I swallowed hard. "You promised," I whispered. "I know. You've talked about walking me down the aisle since I was little." Another sigh. Things change.
No.
Priorities reveal themselves. That's what changes. Before I could answer, another voice entered the call.
"Mom."
"Darcy, sweetheart," she said quickly. "You're a strong woman. You don't need someone to walk you down the aisle." I closed my eyes. There it was again. The family pattern. Vanessa gets protection. Darcy gets independence forced onto her. "You'll still have a beautiful wedding," Mom continued. "So please don't upset your sister over this." I almost laughed again. My wedding. And somehow I was still expected to emotionally protect everyone else. "Okay," I said quietly. Both of them paused, probably expecting an argument.
Tears.
Begging. But I was suddenly too tired for all of that. "Okay," I repeated. "If that's your decision." Then I hung up, and for a few seconds, I just sat there staring at the wall. Caleb walked in carrying 2 mugs of tea. One look at my face, and he set both mugs down immediately. "What happened?" I tried to answer calmly. Really tried. But the second I opened my mouth, I broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just years of disappointment finally cracking open. "He's not coming," I whispered. Caleb frowned. "What?" He says walking me down the aisle would upset Vanessa. The silence that followed felt different. Not stunned. Not confused. Angry. Not at me.
For me.
And honestly, that hurt in the gentlest way possible. Because people who truly love you become angry at the things you learn to tolerate. Caleb knelt beside me. "Darcy," he said softly, "that is not normal." I laughed through tears. I know, but deep down, part of me didn't know. Because when dysfunction is your normal, healthy love feels unfamiliar. That night, I barely slept. Not because of the aisle. Not really. It was what the aisle represented. A father choosing his daughter, supporting her, showing up. And mine had chosen comfort over me. Again. The next morning, my phone exploded with family messages.
Mom.
"Please don't punish your father." "Aunt Kelly, your sister is fragile right now." Vanessa herself. "You know this isn't personal." Not personal. Only my wedding. Only my father. Only one of the most emotional moments of my life. But sure, not personal. I stared at the messages quietly. And for the first time in years, something shifted inside me. Not anger.
Clarity.
Because suddenly, I saw the pattern clearly. I had spent my entire life shrinking important moments to make other people comfortable. Birthdays, graduations, achievements. Every time something belonged to me, someone else's feelings became bigger. And I was expected to smile through it. Not this time. That afternoon, Caleb's grandmother, Eleanor, came by the apartment. Eleanor was 78, elegant, and more emotionally present than my entire family combined. She took one look at me and said, "What did they do now?" I laughed softly, and then told her everything. She listened quietly.
No interruptions. No minimizing.
No defending them. When I finished, she simply reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Oh, sweetheart," she said gently. "You deserved better parents than that." The sentence hit harder than I expected. Because sometimes, healing begins the moment someone finally names the wound correctly. I looked down quickly, blinking back tears. Then Eleanor said something. That changed the entire course of my wedding day. "If your father won't walk you down the aisle," she smiled softly, "then someone better will." And suddenly, for the first time since the phone call, I could breathe again. Wedding mornings are strange. The world expects excitement,
Joy.
magic, but sometimes they begin with grief. I stood in front of the mirror that morning, staring at myself in white silk and soft makeup, trying to ignore the ache sitting quietly in my chest. Not because I doubted marrying Caleb. Never that. I doubted something else. Whether people like me ever fully stop mourning. The parents they wished they had. Outside the bridal suite, I could hear movement. Voices. Music. Guests arriving. 200 people filled that church.
Friends.
Coworkers. Neighbors. Extended relatives. And somewhere among them sat my parents and Vanessa, still expecting me to make their behavior comfortable. But something had changed inside me over the last 3 days. Pain has a strange way of clearing fog. I no longer wanted their approval badly enough to betray myself for it. A soft knock came at the door. Eleanor stepped inside. And honestly, she looked more elegant than half the guests combined. Navy blue suit, pearl earrings, silver hair perfectly styled. But it wasn't her appearance that steadied me. It was her presence.
Calm.
Reliable.
Warm.
The kind of presence I spent my whole life searching for in my own mother. She smiled gently at me. "You ready?" I nodded, then immediately started crying. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears slipping out before I could stop them. "Oh, sweetheart," Eleanor whispered. She walked over slowly and fixed a loose strand of my hair. And somehow, that tiny gesture nearly broke me completely. Because love often reveals itself through small tenderness. You know, she said softly, a wedding is not about who disappointed you. She straightened my veil carefully. It's about who showed up. I inhaled shakily. And for the first time that morning, the grief loosened slightly. Outside, music began. The ceremony was starting. One of the coordinators entered nervously. It's time. My heart pounded instantly. This was it. The moment I had imagined since childhood. Only now, it looked nothing like the version little Darcy once dreamed about. And strangely, that no longer felt tragic. Eleanor offered me her arm. Not dramatically. Not ceremonially. Just naturally. As if she had been doing it forever. And, in that moment, I realized something painful and beautiful at the same time. Real family doesn't force love to feel earned. It simply gives it. The church doors remained closed ahead of us. Beyond them waited 200 guests. Whispers. Expectations. And my parents. I wondered briefly what they thought would happen. Did they assume I would walk alone? Did they think I would quietly absorb the humiliation again?
Probably.
Because people grow comfortable watching the strong daughter survive disappointment. The music shifted softly. The coordinator smiled. Then the doors opened. And everything changed. The church became completely silent. Not polite silence. Not ceremonial silence.
Shock.
Because standing beside me, holding my arm proudly, was not my father. It was Eleanor. And somehow, that image said everything words never could. I saw my mother's face first. Confusion. Then realization. Then guilt. My father looked stunned. Truly stunned. As if he had just realized something too late. Vanessa stared at the floor. Unable to look at me. But the rest of the room? They smiled.
Not awkwardly.
Not judgmentally. Warmly. Emotionally. Because everyone understood what they were witnessing. Not revenge.
Love.
Chosen love. And chosen love carries a different kind of power. Eleanor squeezed my hand gently as we walked. Slowly. Gracefully. Every step down that aisle felt lighter than the last. Not because my pain disappeared. Because for the first time in my life, I stopped chasing people who refused to show up for me. Halfway down the aisle, I looked toward Caleb. And his expression nearly destroyed me emotionally. He was crying. Not out of pity. Not sadness.
Pride.
The kind of pride that says, I see exactly who you are. When we finally reached the altar, Eleanor kissed my cheek softly. Then she whispered something. I will carry for the rest of my life. Never beg people to choose you. And then she placed my hand into Caleb's. The ceremony itself felt peaceful after that. Not perfect. Not untouched by pain. But honest. And honestly, honest joy feels better than forced perfection. During the vows, Caleb held my hands tightly and said, You spent your whole life being treated like you were too much and not enough at the same time. The room became still. But with me, he continued softly, you will never have to earn your place. I cried immediately, because people who grow up emotionally neglected often mistake unconditional love for fantasy, until someone finally gives it to them. After the ceremony came the reception. And that's where things became uncomfortable, because suddenly, my parents wanted access to me again. Funny how public shame creates urgency. My mother cornered me near the reception hall entrance. Darcy, she whispered urgently. You embarrassed your father. I blinked slowly.
No apology. No accountability.
Just concern for his feelings. Again. I smiled politely. No, I said calmly. He embarrassed himself. Her face fell instantly. Probably because it was the first time I had ever spoken without protecting them first. A few minutes later, my father approached. He looked older somehow. Smaller. I didn't think you'd replace me, he admitted quietly. Replace. Interesting word. Because replacement implies something valuable existed in the first place. I looked at him carefully. You left the space empty, I said softly. Someone else simply loved me enough to fill it. That sentence stayed with him. I could see it. And honestly, it stayed with me too. because it was true. The rest of the evening passed beautifully. Laughter, dancing, warmth. Real warmth. Not the performative kind I grew up around. At one point, I watched Eleanor dancing slowly with Caleb near the edge of the room. And suddenly, I understood something important. Blood creates relatives. Love creates family. Near the end of the night, Vanessa approached quietly. For once, she looked uncertain instead of entitled. I didn't think he'd actually do it, she admitted softly. I believed her. Because selfish people often assume others will clean up the damage for them. Like I always had. I'm sorry, she whispered. I studied her face for a long moment, then nodded once. Not because everything was healed, but because forgiveness and access are not the same thing. Some people deserve peace from you, without unlimited closeness to you. And that realization changed my life. As the reception ended, Caleb wrapped an arm around my waist and asked softly, "You okay?" I looked around the room one last time. At the people who showed up, the people who stayed, the people who chose me freely. And for the first time in my life, family no longer felt like something painful. It felt safe. I am now, I whispered, because sometimes the best revenge is not anger. It's building a beautiful life with the people who never made you beg for love.